Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's lecture, which is of symbolic expression, I have my colleague Ms. Manisha Sharma, who is going to interpret the lecture in symbolic language. So let us try to understand sociology as a discipline. Sociology as a discipline tries to study society. It is a science of society. So in the first half of the lecture, we discussed the discipline of sociology, its emergence and historical development. In this lecture, we are going to talk about the subject matter of sociology. That means, what do sociologists study? What are so interesting about sociologists? And the first thing that we need to keep in mind is the sociologists study social facts, which are aspects of social life that shapes a personal behavior. Now, social fact is a concept given by Durkheim in his book, The Rules of Sociological Method. And he will kind of help us to understand that anything around us can be a fact. It helps us to kind of develop certain laws to understand social reality. So, what are sociologists doing? Studying the consequences of new patterns, such as the way children are affected. So we need a lot of change in the society, and children are affected by them, or the changing needs of education, housing, healthcare. And today we see in contemporary society, the state is changing. So how do we make sense of the emergence of the neoliberal state? How does the change in the state affect the population? So if the state is moving towards neoliberalism, there is a withdrawal of welfare policy. It will have an impact on society, and sociologists tries to look into this. So during the past 2 years, when we were under the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, sociologists were trying to make sense of the concept of new normal. How is society changing? What are the class factors which are important? How, as a member of upper class, you could privilege to stay back home and work from home. But if you are from a migrant worker, staying at home was a crisis. So this is when sociological imaginations was needed, and sociologists were trying to make sense of all these conditions emerging from a pandemic. So class structure, gender, we were leading a lot of news in newspaper, media report, gender violence had increased. So these are some of the subjects that sociologists study. Sociologists study the way society develops and functions on both large and small scale. Large scale, if you see migration, so you have migration in the domestic sphere from one state to the other, you have international migration, so that's on a larger scale. Or from national government to cultural norms, to local politics, family values, sociologists study the who and why of society. And here we can study our own society, a society in which we are born and we are living, or we could study the other society. So in the beginning, when the discipline was emerging, there was a distinction made between sociology and anthropology. So people were saying that sociology is the study of your own society and anthropology is the study of other society. But this distinction is no longer valid, because even sociologists are studying the other society. Now when we look into the subject matter of sociology, what comes into mind is micro level study and macro level study. Now what is a micro level study? It is the study of small group behavior, and it focuses on the nature of everyday human interaction on a small scale. So for instance, if we were to understand the family values, so if we can't kind of club all the families across India or global into one category, what we then need to do is study, say, Hindu family, or study the family in urban area. So the study will be on a smaller scale. Now when we are studying on a small scale, we can study social status, social roles, and other component of social structure. So it is more focused on interaction between the status and the roles of individual. Now, micro level study might look at the accepted rules of conversation in various groups such as among teenagers or business professionals. Now, if we can look into say a post COVID again scenario, a lot of individual youth have started using social media. They are making videos on YouTubes and so on. So, if we were to study the impact of social media on youth, then we need to study at a micro level and try to understand through interaction, through say more kind of in-depth interview analysis, the understanding of the impact at a micro level. Now, macro sociology or macro level study will take a larger group. So, we need to study the entire society as a whole. So, if we were to study say the impact of COVID-19 on gender violence, then we do a comparative study say between India and America. So, the whole of Indian society would be the universe of the study, and the study would be done on a large scale. So, this approach, that is the macro level analysis, focuses more on system, on the population and high level of theoretical abstraction. It is not concerned kind of very deeply into individuals' feelings, thinking, emotions, but more in terms of say quantifiable data. It is more through survey and census that data would be arrived at. Macro level analysis trends between larger group. As I have already given an example, say India versus America or any say South Asia versus Europe, so larger level of analysis. And here the language might change over time, or say even in terms of how we are going to use different kind of translation from one language to the other, because the group is a mixed group, it's a heterogeneous group. So language can be a kind of a limitations. Now, when we look into the study of the subject of sociology, and as I said, the sociologists study social fact, and social fact is a concept given by Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim, in the book Rules of Sociological Method, defined sociology as the study of objective social fact. Now, what is social fact? Social fact are those things like law, custom, morality, religious beliefs and practices, language, system of money, credit, debt, business or professional practices that are defined externally to the individual. So, he was basically had kind of explained social fact as things which are sui generis, that is they exist prior to individual. Second, they are external, that is it is not kind of a personal property or does not belong specifically to one individual. And third, it exerts a moral pressure, and this moral order was the core idea that Durkheim was trying to send across, that we are kind of compelled to abide by the collective consciousness. The collective consciousness is the feeling of belonging to a group, to be a member of that group. So that moral pressure helps us to be a part of the society. So sociologists are not interested in biography. They are not kind of trying to understand what is the nature of an individual or how one becomes a celebrity or the anything to do with individual. It is also not to do with psychological dimension. It's not trying to understand the emotions behind certain action. All that sociologists are trying to do is understand social reality as it exists. Social reality that affects the lives of individuals and the way in which it structures society. So, the interaction between individual and the interaction between individual and society becomes the subject matter of sociology. So, according to Durkheim, social facts precede the individual and will continue to exist after he or she is gone. So, for say a religion or a political institution, they are not dependent on individual, you know. So, earlier when we had all these primitive types of society where kinship was hereditary, it could be dependent on an individual, but when society has undergone change in the industrialized society, it is not dependent on individual. Number 2, social fact consists of details on obligations which individuals are frequently unaware. So, we have to be conscious about it. And how do we become conscious about it? Only when we are kind of morally abiding. We learn about the norms, we learn about the ways of our life, we will become aware of the social facts around us. Third, it has endowed with an external coercive power by reason of which individuals are controlled. So, you know, like the best example that many sociologists give to understand this power is that, you know, we do things not necessarily by law. Say for on a traffic light, we know that when the light is red, we stop. But so many times, we don't get the red signal, yet we stop. So, if we don't kind of be part of the collectivity, then we will be kind of in a chaos. We will not have a social order. So, for Durkheim, he was again a proponent of sociology as a science. So, for him, social facts were facts of natural science, and it could be studied without reference to subjective experience of the individual. So, Durkheim was not concerned about individuals, he was more concerned about society, about the social reality, and therefore, he kind of says that social reality is out there. You can observe, classify, and compare social reality. Now, along with social fact, the other concept which is very important in sociology is social action. Now, social action will take us away from sociology as a science to understand sociology as more in terms of interpretative meaning. And therefore, when we look into Durkheim defining science, the sociology, a study of unique dimension, external social facts, Weber, sociology was to do with meaning attached to the action. Every action that one does has a meaning. Now, that meaning can be interpreted differently by different contexts, and that is what is more important for sociologists to understand. Actions to which individual attach subjective meaning. So, when we learn sociology, we know there is a kind of a discourse on objectivity versus subjectivity. That is objectivity possible in sociology, because we are studying our own society, our own belief system, our own custom. Can there be objectivity? And therefore, Max Weber talks about subjectivity, that it is possible to be biased in our study, but then it has to be kind of done in an objective manner. We know there is a subjectivity, but as a trained sociologist, we need to kind of do away with the objective biases. So, what is social action? Action is social in so far as by virtue of subjective meaning attached to it by the acting individual or individuals, it takes account of the behavior of other and is thereby oriented in its course. This is the definition given by Weber in his work published in 1922. And here we see the methodology of sociology that's coming out. The subject matter of sociology is to understand subjective meaning, or what is his discipline known as Verstehen, interpretative sociology. Now, when we look into the third concept, which is very important, or the subject matter, is paradigms. Paradigms, what are paradigms? Paradigms are philosophical theoretical framework which is used within discipline. It's not so specific only to sociology. Every discourse science will have a paradigm, but it is a kind of a theoretical framework which helps us to understand reality more sociologically. So, it could be based on generalization, and there are certain kind of research which helps us to as evidence of that paradigm. And then we also talk about paradigm shift. So, if we look into Comte, he is giving us positive science. So, the theoretical framework was sociology as science. When Weber comes in, the paradigm shift is from sociology as science to sociology as subjective meaning. So, this is how we talk about change in the theoretical framework. Paradigm, when we talk about paradigm, we also talk about Talcott-Parsons. And Talcott-Parsons reformulated Durkheim and other structural functionalism. He comes in the 20th century and he talks about the functions of social system. His AGIL model is kind of very important to understand the functions of social systems, and he is going to talk about a general model of analysis suited to unlimited number of research topics. So, there are multiple paradigms in every discipline. Now, we look into some of the concepts which will help us to know the subject matter of sociology. So, another concept which is important is social groups, So, we know that group is a part of society. There are number of individuals living together. So, there are many groups. Now, when we look into groups definition, it is any collection of at least two people who interact with some frequency and who share some sense of aligned identity. So, then family is a social group, but we cannot call a crowd as a social group because interaction has to be there. And interaction means two individuals or more than two individuals are sharing the values and belief. So, the similarity, interaction, and therefore, over a period of time, they start identifying themselves. A family, village, state, political party, trade union, these are all examples of social group. Another concept which is very crucial for understanding sociology is status and role. Status refers to what a person is, whereas the closely linked notion of role refer to the behavior expected of people in a status. So, status is your assigned position. You are given a position in society and there could be multiple status at one point of time, and each status is there attributed with a role. So, we kind of have a status as say in a family as father, and you have a role of protecting or taking care of the child. So, that is the understanding of status and role. Many a time the word prestige is used synonymously with status. Prestige is that when you are at a certain status, a certain kind of discourse is expected, a behavior is expected towards you. So, if you are say at a higher position of state bureaucrat, then you have a high prestige. But if you are kind of a lower level of a migrant worker or say begging on the street, then you have a low prestige. So, these prestige then help us rank status in a hierarchy, and hierarchy in the sense of worth, in how much of worth is relevant. Status as honor or prestige is a part of stratification. So, when we do a kind of study of social stratification, we will study about status and role. Now, statuses are of two types. Number one is ascribed status. Ascribed status means your status is fixed, and it is kind of fixed at the time of birth. So, the caste is ascribed status. You know at the birth that you are a Brahmin or a Shudra or a Vaishya, and it is kind of no change takes place. It is fixed and it is not changed. Achieved status is acquired status. You acquire the status through education, through employment or job. So there is a mobility. So you can kind of move up the ladder and improve your status in society. Another important concept is culture. So the culture is very important in sociology, and it has been explained by different sociologists in different sense. But to briefly talk about culture, it means norms and values. And norms and values which help us identify a group, and the members of that group abide by that culture. We also have a concept of cultural lag. That means the technology growth is taking place, but the social aspect is not being able to catch. So a lag takes place. So when we look into these concepts and we look into the works of these thinkers like Weber, Durkheim, we see that the core understanding of sociology is to understand the relation between individual and society at one, and two, to understand the interaction between agency and structure. So if we kind of read sociology, we'll see some sociologists give preference to individuals, some to society, and some to kind of both, especially also in terms of agency and social structure. Giddens help us to understand the interaction between agency and social structure through the term structuration. So all these are subject matter of society, and this helps us to help understand sociology as a discipline which is different from common sense. All that we are talking about is also something which a common sense man can understand, but sociology is beyond common sense. It studies the common sense and gives us a new understanding of the social reality. So this, by understanding the subject matter of sociology, we will be able to understand what is the discipline of sociology. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.